So the other day, I was actually looking at how many lines of code I had written in an open source project that I was working on in React Native. Kind of an obsession of mine coming back from college days where I would do word counts on theses. I was very fussy to see how many lines I'd gotten. So the number came out to this, 6,000 for those of you that can't see this in the back, 6,000 lines of code. But fundamentally, with all the accumulated packages and components and modules downloaded, it actually came out close to about 19,000 lines of code. So my reaction was a little subtle amongst this. I just decided that was pretty good, and I decided to get my family involved on my celebration. But no, seriously, as part of the open source community, you do inherit everyone's code. It becomes your responsibility. You do fork and check stuff back in, so you want to make sure you do things right. So tongue-in-cheek, it's 6,000, but I like to think of it more as 19. On the other end of the spectrum, the largest source repository in the world is built in a monorepo, and it's by Google. And it contains 2 billion lines of code. 2 billion. It seems like the stuff of myth and legend. They have close to 3.5 million commits. It's 86 terabytes in file size. It is monstrous. 15,000 developers have worked on this over the last 10 years. We get nervous when there's 15 developers and one of them leaves and what might happen with the code, let alone to think that 15,000 times that amount is what Google actually manage. It's one of those things that you look at companies like Uber, Airbnb, Babel, and Twitter, they all use a monorepo as well. And so the idea was brought to me internally by an architect in my group that suggested, hey, we could do this at American Airlines. We could build our own monorepo. Of course, from reading about this, the technologist in me gets giddy and excited, and I think to myself, yeah, we could probably do this, but it's just another itch in my DevOps scratch, and I'm sure a lot of you have them here. We wanted to do it to solve things like code reusability. We wanted to do package management better. We wanted to do cross-project changes better. We wanted to simplify our dependency management. So you're probably wondering why I picked 3 subjects as one, and I'm going to try and represent it here. At the core of everything that we do is our modus operandi, simple Latin vernacular for mode of operations. You all have a modus operandi at your company, and over time you've built procedures and patterns and practices, and some of them may have lived for a long time. We're in the mainframe world, and some of our practices have lived back to the 70s, which is crazy. But we are trying to modernize on top of that. We have all these other initiatives. We have the monorepo as one, and there are several others that we're looking at. And then at the exosphere, at the top of all of this now comes DevOps. And suddenly, as you guys know, there's the technology side of DevOps, and then there's the cultural side of DevOps. It's almost like a chemical reaction when DevOps comes in and mixes itself with processes that have just been around for a long period of time. So I wanted to talk today and tell you guys a story about the things that we went through to try and mix these worlds together. So just before I get into my talk, a little bit about myself. Philip Knezevich. I work in the maintenance and engineering department of American Airlines, 10 years, originally from Australia. So I've been told my accent switches between the two. Over there, they think I'm American. Over here, they think I'm Australian, or something or the other in the middle. I do have a developer background, and yes, I have written more than 6,000 lines of code. But I'm scratching my head because I came from the Microsoft world where we had fancy GUIs and we had nice flashing things happening, and now we're back into CLI. And that for me is a head scratcher because Git, Node, Kubernetes, Yarn, Homebrew, these are all initiatives now that have just gone back to CLI. So that makes me scratch my head. Of course, any of the software engineers in the group are like, this guy's crazy. But no, it really is a change for me to understand. I feel like I'm a generation back from that. So just a little bit about American Airlines. We are the world's largest airline, largest by flights, destination, employees, and fleet size. So we fly a staggering 6,700 flights a day. In that time, we have to have the absolute utmost paramount in security, safety, and reliability. We have to make sure our pilots and FAs get to each flight on time, which can be challenging when they have to connect. And it can be challenging for people to get to points when they have to connect, and I'm sure several of you may have had to connect to get here today. We have to conform to FAA, NTSB, TSA mandates, and then we have to work around airport congestion, air traffic, dodging bad weather. We have to cater for many different needs for users on our flights, and as you know, people are different. On top of all of this, we have to get you all there on time, and that's a difficult thing with all these other things going on at the same time. We fly 350 destinations across 50 countries around the planet. It's a vast network. We fly to 5 different continents. Unfortunately, we don't fly to Antarctica yet, but if we ever do, I'll be the first one to go there. But on top of all of this, we have 130,000 employees, 27,000 flight attendants, and 15,000 pilots. Our fleet size is in excess of 950 and growing. This is a deliberate $25 billion investment into new aircraft. An advantageous offering we have within our airline against our competitors is new aircraft. We want to provide this to you, and I can tell you from a customer experience that being in a new aircraft is like being in a new car. You don't get the new car smell, you still have to smell the people within your vicinity, but everything else is pretty much the same. Okay, so internally we did make a shift to DevOps. We started off with the hero developers and engineers that came into the company, people that have been around the industry, that have been to conferences like this and just were seeing the shift. And they were coming in and they were saying, hey, we need to do DevOps. We need to do CI/CD, we need to validate test cases, security, we need to do infrastructure as code, all the wonderful facets that come with DevOps. And of course, the people in the company that didn't know about DevOps would just smile and nod and agree and say, that's great, go ahead and do it, without really enabling them. And that had to change. So internally, our CIO, Maya Liebman, did make a change to bring a DevOps first culture to the airline. So we have an enterprise level tool chain now, and we have a change in our project structures to make sure that DevOps is more heavily baked and coupled with Agile. The industry is changing fast, and in my area alone, we've picked out 5 areas that have really caused problems for us. And the first is that IT is disconnected from the business and vision. What do I mean by this? I think developers, level 4, corporate office, headphones on, listening to Metallica, although I've been told now it's Enya and relaxing music, but keyboards, 2 monitors, coffee, code monkey, right? They're writing code. This code gets passed through certain groups, pass the parcel type of thing until it hits our end users. In my world, it's mechanics and line maintenance staff and stores clerks. And these are people that are in airports where there's jet noise of planes taking off and planes landing and screeching and scurrying and machinery going on and lots of stuff happening, and their computer specs are very different. The product experience from here, from the corporate office, is still something that we are trying to bridge and get better with, involving our business in our agile process a lot more and trying to get better feedback from the customer experience. The second one resonates with me a little more deeply, which is that leadership is tracking activities and not the results. And what I mean by this is initially I was a bit obsessive and compulsive about making sure that agile rituals were followed properly. You must do your daily stand-ups, you must have backlog grooming, you have to have acceptance criteria, all the things that you do within agile. Now I've come to learn that teams know themselves better than we do, thankfully, and they actually know what works better in their culture. So now I step back and I look at the results. And through the results, I use the magical MTTs that you've all heard. Mean time to debug, mean time to repair, mean time to implement, and there's variations, mean time to break fix, et cetera, et cetera. We look at how fast we're tracking and how much better we're trying to improve from a time perspective. The third one was the other one that I mentioned that we had to change, which is our project structure, which was fundamentally broken. Funding was typically done by divisions, and you have several divisions in our organization, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. And within those divisions, you get a certain amount of money from finance. Yippee. And then you have to figure out what you're actually going to do to actually get done. So of course, everyone knows that if they don't get their project approved for this year, it may have to wait a year or even longer. So the list would often look like this. Priority 1, priority 1, priority 1, priority 1, priority 1, priority 10. Okay, finance draws a line here, but what about all these priority ones down here? It's confusing. So now, we're moving into the product model. We have a recurring and ongoing backlog now, so we can just put it in there and just keep those priorities done as we see as the most important. Problems 4 and 5 were interesting for me. I have a lot of stories around this. I think one I'll share is a lean coffee session that I was facilitating a while back where we had 12 different people from 12 different groups. If you haven't done lean coffee before, I strongly advise you go do it. It's a great experience. But we got stuck on a topic that was basically business values and IT values do not match. And everyone, all 12 of them, actually agreed on this as the #1 problem they had in their group. One great example was a guy who had actually said that there was a spelling mistake made on a simple HTML page, right? HTML page, simple spelling mistake. Couldn't get into prod for 2 weeks because that change was bundled in with all these other technical debt changes and non-functional changes, and suddenly they had a release cycle and they had to get all these other things approved. It took them 2 weeks to have a spelling mistake there. I don't know what the word was in the end, but that's interesting. So, the cynicism in IT has often been around for a while. I've collected these memes many times over. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. The one on the right came out this morning. But these are the types of memes that you see, being socialized across a lot of technical groups. The one that always gets me, well, there's two, is the networking guys, because they always get blamed first. And then finally, when the PMs and the managers try to work with developers for estimates and then just end up using them as deadlines. And the conversation typically goes, how long is it going to take? And the developer, kind of defensively says, well, if I had a requirements document and, no unplanned work and I had, that gun developer helping me, plus minus 30%, take 3 months. So the asker, the PM will say, okay, 3 months, good. And then that's what they use. Like, it's crazy, right? And both walk away feeling a little awkward about that conversation. So internally, we're trying to ratify these problems. We're trying to get away from them. So just a very simple workflow here in my area. We have our UI, our business people. In our case, it's the line maintenance folks. It's the people at the airports working in maintenance and engineering. Typically, just interface with a UI. And then behind the scenes, they don't care what happens. The UI is for them. But behind the scenes, we typically go to a solar layer, which then goes to an abstractification team because we don't allow direct access to our mainframe. The problem we have is that each of these silos have their own teams. And this is where it gets tricky because they have their own managers and their own priorities and their own deadlines. The SOA team in particular gets more messy because they have to deal with other groups that also have their own managers and teams and also have to work around their priorities. And those people will push back saying, I can't do that because I'm also working with all these other app teams. So the lines of convolution and messiness start sprawling all over the place. It becomes very difficult. And then the worst part of it all is just trying to work with the mainframe team who are also working with all these other app teams. Very confusing. We had to think differently around the way we were doing this. So as you're all probably aware, there's this notion now of products, moving away from projects to products. And so what we did was we quite simply just took out the resources from those groups and we created this notion of a product team. Now, we're still in our infancy with this. We're trying to get better with this, but fundamentally, it's been described as a get out of my way team, get out of my way architecture. It's a small business model. Think we are now a small business team. We have the resources we want from each of these groups, and so they're now incubated design, self-sustainable. We don't care about the rest of the world. My product team has it all, right? So it's kind of trying to bring that speed to delivery in there. One of the challenges we have with this, and I should also add, we've also included architects, SREs, some QA, UX. They're also part of these product teams in this self-sustainable environment. One of the problems we had is, now that we're trying to move to DevOps, we're having all these multiple pipes. Product teams are now having their own multiple pipes, but we also have a monorepo, which I'll get to in the moment, because I want to talk a little bit about the mainframe. I say this fondly, they're not really the black sheep of the family. It's just, you go to Google and you DevOps, you search for DevOps and you'll get hundreds of examples in the JavaScript, Java, .NET world. Mainframe, not so much, because they've been around since most of you were born. But there is now, as you saw, a wonderful presentation this morning from CSG, there's a lot of work being invested into DevOpsifying the mainframe. And we went down that route as well. So we started partnering up with a company called Compuware. I'm sure you've heard of them. Chris O'Malley gave a great talk, I think it was in London. And so with Compuware, the first thing we did was try and get our source control into a proper repo. So we're using ISPW for that. It's a little blurry from my side. I don't know if it is for you, but we are using ISPW for the promotion and build of code. Then we use Topaz Total Test, to execute and validate our test cases. And then there's quite a bit of analysis, gate check type stuff before we finally promote to our integration environment, and then ISPW helps with that. I'm not going to go into the same detail that CSG did this morning, but fundamentally, we started making sure that we had the right checks and balances in a lot of the mainframe code that we were writing in COBOL. Where these got challenging for us is the mainframe is a tightly coupled dependency to other systems. If a field changes in the mainframe, all the other subsequent downstream systems also have to react to that. So we wanted a way to try and put that into our Jenkins pipeline and bundle it together. And for that, we're actually using Zebia Labs, and they have a tool called Release, XL Release, which actually orchestrates if we have any JavaScript code or any .NET code or any Java level code alongside the mainframe. It'll actually build it all as one. So I'm going to change gears for a second. Let's talk about the toothpaste. Anyone here has kids knows kids love to squeeze toothpaste at the very front. And they'll just squeeze at it and squeeze at it and squeeze at it, and then they're like, oh, it's done, and then they'll throw it in the bin. I'm sure it drives you all nuts. It personally drives me nuts. I've got two, and they do that. And I have to pull it out of the bin and say, look at all of this. But anyway, so when we were in the situation of writing test cases, we had a very similar feeling to this. So the mainframe is not an object-oriented framework. It's, COBOL is not that. COBOL is prescriptive. Mainframes typically rely on three-letter transaction codes, which in turn interact with what's called an MFS, or a message file system. I think of it as a glorified parameterizer. And then it interfaces with PSBs, which is a logical IMS data structure, which gets represented as a program. So initially, at first, we were writing these tests, and we were squeezing at the front, and the test came out okay. And then we came into the situation for the mainframe knowledges in the crowd called the conversational transaction. And the conversational transaction is pretty much what it says it is. It's you having a conversation with the mainframe, where you'll send inputs to it, it'll send a result, and then you can make a decision around that result, send it back, and then it can happen a few times, and you have this decision tree. So we started to realize a lot of the test cases that we were writing were not inclusive, a lot of these use case scenarios and decision forks that were being made. So we were stuck in the situation where the tool, which was meant to be a slave for us, was actually more of the other way around. So let's try and automate it, So yeah, sure, this'll make it happen faster, right? You just wrap a bit of code around and it'll happen faster. But the same problem, right? Once you start investing in automation, you can do things quicker, but you may miss a lot of these things. So we had to think about this. We partner up with a company called DXC. You may know them. And actually, Norm Wall, who's sitting, Norm, you want to stand up for a second? He's our guy that's been putting a lot of this together. We really had to think methodically about what we were going to put into our load testing tool. And after this, don't talk to me, talk to him. I'm going to defer it to him. He'll tell you some stories around how we tried to set that up. But the fundamental of the story is, don't automate too much with fast, fancy tools. And this may be applicable to you guys. Maybe this is not a true statement for you guys, but for us, we found that we could have gone to Amazon and purchased the $120 toothpaste extractor. And I apologize if anyone here has actually bought this. But in a situation like this, toothpaste is limited to certain forms of tube. It's harder to clean and maintain. It has unnecessary dependencies. It's embedded in a wall. Right? So, and we felt that way with a lot of the thinking behind automation in testing. I'm more thinking of this, back in the old days of Mercury Load Runner, where you had to isolate your own environment, you had to get test data in there, and it was an environment, you couldn't use QA stage or any of the other tiers because the purpose was to actually bring it down through capacity testing. But it was kind of akin to that. Let's think about what we're actually going to try and do with our testing. So in the end, the $8.99 tool from Amazon, the little glider that comes at the back, is kind of more metaphorical for what we were trying to do. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the process. Let's promote the notion of inner sourcing, open trust, and collaboration between developer communities. We try actively to get our mainframers to speak to our technical guys. We're trying to really promote this idea of making sure that test coverage becomes an integral part of what we do. Trusting in the fail-fast process of DevOps. Because what happens is, every developer's number one thing is, let's get the damn code into production. I don't care about test cases, but failing fast means that you actually learn a lot quicker. And you don't learn from prod mistakes, you fail in the environments that get to prod. So we had to bring that mindset back into a lot of the thinking of what we were doing. Fundamentally, through DXC, and Norm will probably correct me on this later, but we actually, we estimated we do save about 30 hours per build via automation. So I don't know, Norm, if that's right by you, but that was what I was told. So the overall stack that we have, so we have two. We use, on the mainframe side, we use ISPW, we use Topaz, and then in the apps ops intelligence, we use Compuware and ZAdvisor. On the more traditional side, we use GitHub Enterprise, Coverity, and then it forks between ADO and Jenkins. And then, as I said, Zebia Labs XL releases where we bundle it all together. We have Moogsoft, which we use to aggregate a lot of our logging into one easy-to-view place, and then Dynatrace for our runtime or real-time troubleshooting and debugging. Okay, so another change of gears. I'm going to talk about plumbing. I don't know how many of you people here are plumbers or if you've actually ever seen a wireframe of plumbing in your house, but it kind of looks like this. Water comes in one pipe, and then typically hits your hot water, and then you have two pipes. And those will probably disperse around your house, you know, kitchen, laundry, wherever you need hot water. But then typically it always goes out through one pipe. And so the fundamentals of this is that when we look at the way that software is evolved, you know, from the evolution of TCP to SOAP services, then we went to RESTful APIs, and now we're looking at microservices. And there's all these changes that are happening now in the way we write code. But the fundamentals of it all is that you're doing the four principles. You're building, you're compiling, you're testing, and you're releasing code. So the monorepo takes this facilitation in mind, thinking you're here and you need to get to here, just like the plumbing. But everything that happens in between, the monorepo believes it can handle it all in one go. So I couldn't get this in my team as a jingle that we could go along, but you know, I substituted the word ring for Lord of the Rings for to describe the monorepo. It's one build to rule them all, one build to find them, one build to compile them all, and with DevOps bind them. You know, I couldn't get it caught on for some reason. I'm not sure why. But so simply, the monorepo works very similar to a traditional SDLC. You sync your workspace to your repo the same way, except now you've got everything. You write the code the way you usually do, and then you just check it in and you review it. I'll go into that process a bit more because it's not that simple, and neither is the commit. So just coming back to my original point, could we actually do this? It was asked the question to me, and I said, well, why don't we try a subset experiment? We said we'd pick 15 apps, and in there we would and we decided the UI ones first because they were JavaScript. They had a mature DevOps stack. And then we actually now have some Java and .NET in there as well. So we decided to do that. And we decided to compile it with 25 shared packages that are intrinsic to American Airlines. Things like connecting to our flight services and cargo and maintenance services, those types of packages. And then we actually have 90 plus third-party dependencies that are being used. This is stuff in the NPM world, Commander, React, Express, Async, Body Parser, Lodash. For the JavaScripters in here, you'll know what I'm talking about, as well as Angular 7. And then we started off with 70 developers. And this is quite an interesting experience because some of those developers had been working in one product for 20 years. Didn't know about this whole other world around them of IT, right? Just, I do my job and I do it here. Now we're suddenly saying to them, you need to bring this in and you need to own everything that we actually do. Because our goal was one CI/CD pipeline. We do have targeted build and release, which I'll get into in a moment. But I've tried to simplify the view of the monorepo here for you. We have apps that just sit in a subfolder, the way that they've always sat. The difference is, you'll see here we have node modules, build scripts, dist, libs, tools. There might be a bin folder, there might be an etc folder. They typically exist inside the app structure, and there's usually 15 of those. Now we've moved those into a shared space, and now we expect our app teams to now reference them there and use them as necessary. I like to think of it more as include files from the old days, but I've been told it's a lot more complicated than that. But so essentially what happens is, if there is a module in the shared area that gets changed by, say, app 2, it may affect app 4, 7, 9, and 14. So now app 2 needs to make sure that whatever he or she has done will not break anything in those other apps. So they check their code in, and we now need to check it against everything else. If we had a more TDD mature environment, this might be easy. Hell, I'll just run the test cases, and if our test coverage is good, it's there. But a lot of these apps are legacy. They don't even know what TDD is. So we've really had to try and do a lot of things to fix the monorepo to be more fluent to deal with these situations. So we started looking at tagging. So every single application is actually attributed to certain files, and then everything runs off this master trunk, right? It's in GitHub. Everything has a master trunk. And then for targeted builds, we just do cherry picking. So we say application 7 needs these modules and these dependencies, and that's what creates the build for that app. We define our app through, quite simply, it's just a JSON file. So that cherry picking goes through. And we've actually gotten smarter with this with our tagging. We actually know which files affect which applications directly. So as soon as you edit it, it automatically will build out those apps that are associated to that. It is scary. It is scary because you don't know a lot about other people's apps. So from that perspective, the number one fear everyone has is let's try and avoid using that as much as possible. But there are some instances, there were some brave ones out there that said, hey, I want to upgrade from Angular 6 to Angular 7. And they had to do it for all the apps. And that's where the value of something like this comes in. So just back to my old programming days, this was a stress for me, 12 o'clock at night, 6 a.m. Deadline, and someone's making a massive change. I'm like, don't break that build. You kind of get worked up about it. Now suddenly, it's not just one app. You're responsible for everything in the entire organization. Holy cow, how do you manage something like that? That's where our check-in process has become very thorough. We have queued up several check-ins, and we analyze them very thoroughly before we commit them. So some things take days, and we've left them there, and some things are so old we abandon them because they've been superseded by new changes, or that developer has a new check-in. So we don't want to be stuck in the situation where we just keep ignoring stuff because it's taking too long. So we've been very intensive about making sure our code reviews have been more thorough on this side. So resultant to this, and I'm sorry, I realize I'm a little over time here, consolidated all our development into one source of truth. That was the big win for us. It's all in one place now. We do code sharing from legacy apps, reusability, simplifying dependency management. There's been a massive increase in development teams, whether you like it or not. It's scary if an app has no developers there, they're out on vacation, and no test cases, and you're making a change into their app, right? So they've actually learned to speak to each other a lot more than they used to. We've got new developers coming in. I said we started with 70. I think we're at about 95 now. And then just realizing the benefits of write once, use many. Don't repeat yourself. Dry versus wet. Don't repeat yourself versus write everything twice. We're on the dry side. So result-wise, 330 times faster to deploy these dependencies. This is a big win for us. Anyone here that has a lot of technical debt, a lot of EOSL type of upgrading, this is a great solution for you guys. 250% increase in developer collaboration. We see it a lot. They definitely are interacting with each other a lot more. 4,200 work hours regained by eliminating the duplicate efforts of a lot of the package management. This is a big one for us. I think there's, 1,700 hours, work hours in a year, so that's close to 2.5 years. So finally, one of the challenges we had, as I said, TDD is a problem. We need more help with TDD. Struggling with feature toggling. I wish I had more time here to speak about feature toggling. It's a fascinating area. Go see Launch Darkly if you can. They're great. We have our own solution internally. We still rely on a lot of the companies that helped us with the monorepo. One of them is Narwhal, which is a ex-Googlers that specialize in the monorepo. They came in to help us. Cutting the cord with them. I don't know if we're in sink or swim. I don't think we're drowning, but I don't think we're swimming. We're kind of in that middle place. And then the biggest problem is most of our projects are still in the traditional poly repo. 15 apps. In my area alone, I own 330, and around American Airlines in general, thousands. So could we ever expand this to the larger org and become a true monorepo like a Google or an Airbnb? I don't know. I'd like to. It's a pipe dream. It would just require a lot of cultural change to make that happen. So my final slide, 3 different topics, one destination, moving to one repo, one pipeline, which also includes the mainframe. That's our goal. If you're thinking about trying to do some of these things in your company, try and understand the right approach. Your teams have to be transparent. You can't have cowboy developers sitting in the corner going, I can do this better than anyone else, and trying to prove that they're better and doing it on their own. You really need to have that extensive collaboration which begins with trust. My name's Philip Knezevich. You can get me on Big Apple PK. My phone likes to act like a bird. Please tweet me. And I hope you enjoyed my chat. Thank you. Thank you.